People, let's get together. Stop all this fussing and fighting. Let's love one another. You gotta help your mother, help your father, help your brothers, help your sisters, help your neighbors and your friends. We are one people, one nation, one destiny. Everybody, y'all. One people, one nation, one destiny. Yeah, yeah.
Welcome to another edition of The Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and we continue our examination of Guyana's public policy, particularly the interface between foreign policy and domestic policy. And today we'll be dealing with a subject, it may sound abstruse to you, but it is about the derecognition of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. Why did Guyana derecognize the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, SADR? Some of you don't know what SADR is or where it is, but let's try to analyze what took place. The big question, of course, is how is Guyana's foreign policy made in the first place? We have seen three significant changes to policies which have existed for decades, and they're quite baffling, of course. The first one, was Taiwan's announcement that CRG, or Cooperative Republic of Guyana had agreed that it should open an office in Georgetown. Of course, this was quickly reversed when it was realized it was a tremendous blunder. Second, Barbados announced that Guyana had entered an agreement to join the regional security system. The major countries in the Caribbean, Jamaica, Trinidad, and Guyana, and Bahamas, never joined the RSS in nearly 40 years. So we were quite surprised last month to hear that the government suddenly, without discussion, agreed to join this RSS. And we don't know the implications of that, but we don't know the motivation for it. And now we learn that the country, Guyana, has agreed to derecognize the SADR, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. But in all three cases, my friends, these announcements were made by foreign governments. In the case of Taiwan, this announcement was made by a resident embassy in Georgetown, not the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In the case of the RSS, this announcement was made by the Prime Minister of Barbados. And in the case of the SADR, this announcement was made by the Foreign Minister of the Kingdom of Morocco. We can't hear from our own governments, and we have to pay attention to what the foreign governments are saying for us to understand how Guyana's foreign policy is being made. So you see, we start with a big difficulty because these things, are like bolts from the blue. We just don't know how people arrive at these decisions and whether these decisions are sound, especially because these decisions are based on principles which have been hammered out for over 40 years. Principles which have been agreed by the PNC administration, by the PPP administrations, and both sides have never indicated any desire to change, particularly on these three matters. There are other matters, of course, but this is very disturbing, a very disturbing trend. Let us look at the SADR, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. The Sahrawi people are Arabs, the residents of Western Sahara. And it was proclaimed by what is called the Polisario, which is the People's Front for the Liberation of Saquet and El Hamara and Rio del Oro. Saquet, El Hamara, and Rio del Oro, Polisario. It's an acronym, People's Front for the Liberation of Saquet, El Hamara, and Rio del Oro. And this was proclaimed on the 27th of February 1976. And they claimed sovereignty over the entire Western Sahara, which is about 266,000 square kilometers, bigger than Guyana, 20,000 square miles bigger than Guyana. It's as big as New Zealand. So we're not talking about some little island in the Pacific or in the Indian Ocean. We're talking about a substantial territory. And it was the former Spanish colony, as you know, in the late 1800s, the big European powers, Britain, France, Portugal, Spain, Germany, scrambled for Africa. And, Spain, the Kingdom of Spain, got hold of this Western Sahara. So since 1884, the Kingdom of Spain has been in control of Western Sahara. After the Second World War, many of these empires, thank God, became very weak because the Nazis had really mauled them. The Indonesian people had to fight against the Dutch. The Vietnamese people had to fight against the French. The Angolans and the Mozambicans had to fight against the Portuguese. And the Sahrawi people had to fight against the Spanish. The result is that Spain finally agreed to pull out. But in pulling out of the Western Sahara, Spain, instead of granting independence to the Sahrawi people, divided the country between Morocco and Mauritania. They partitioned it. Just imagine in Guyana on the 26th of May, 1966, Britain is pulling out, and instead of giving the Guyanese people independence, they give half of the country to Venezuela and half the country to Suriname. And that is a mirror of what took place in Western Sahara. Spain, instead of granting the Sahrawi people their independence, handed over the country to Morocco and Mauritania. Naturally, the Sahrawi people rose up in rebellion. Most of them are still living in tents in Algeria, neighboring Algeria. But the country was split between two predatory states, Mauritania and Morocco. After years of struggle, the Mauritanians pulled out and the Moroccans just occupied Western Sahara. So the struggle goes on, as they say, a luta continua. The Sahrawi people are still fighting, and this matter has gone to the United Nations, it's gone to the African Union, and Moroccans are really in military occupation of Western Sahara. Now, the SADR or the Polisario controls only about a quarter of the Western Sahara, which is called liberated territories. And they are really fighting a battle for recognition. And the Polisario, which is the you can call it the armed force of the SADR, has been fighting because although United Nations attempted to impose a ceasefire, the Moroccans did not observe that ceasefire, and the Sahrawi people were forced to resume the struggle against the Moroccan army. And quite frankly, the SADR is not without friends. You may see in your photographs a picture of former Prime Minister Samuel Hines receiving the letters of credence from the SADR ambassador a few years ago. So for up to the present time, about 41 states actually recognized the SADR. And we in Guyana recognized the SADR from September 1979. That is why even in August 2020, after the general regional elections, SADR sent a congratulatory letter to President Irfan Ali. So the interaction, the relationship between SADR and Guyana was lively, and it is not something that has been ignored by either side. And it is as significant as our recognition of the Palestine Liberation Army, or the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, as you know, in the territories which are occupied by Israel. So there are many places around the world which are still subject to colonial domination. And in this case, the Polisario, just like the PLO, received the support of Guyanese governments for over 4 decades. But things seem to be changing now, and we must try to understand what is taking place with our government and what is responsible for these changes. We extended solidarity based on principle. And if we remove that solidarity, if we de-recognize the SADR, we must explain why we are abandoning principle at this point in time, when these people, the Sahrawi people, look to us for decades for diplomatic and other forms of support in the international fora of the world. Now, my friends, we are dealing with international law and international relations. And the United Nations, since 1960, passed a resolution called Resolution 1514. And let me quote at length from this United Nations resolution. It's important to us because we are the beneficiaries of that resolution. And it says this: the subjection of peoples to alien subjugation, domination, and exploitation constitutes a denial of fundamental rights. It is contrary to the Charter of the United Nations, and it is an impediment to the promotion of world peace and cooperation. All peoples have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. Beautiful words. And these words would remain on paper unless states around the world actively try to implement them. And Guyana has been in the forefront of liberation, particularly African liberation. As you know, we made contributions to the liberation of Southern Africa, Angola, Mozambique, South Africa. And in this case, we're talking about Western Sahara, which is in the north, western part of Africa. My friends, up to the 22nd of October 2020, but just a couple of months after the government change, our United Nations permanent representative repeated our support for the principle of self-determination. It is there in the record. It affirmed support for the UN Security Council and General Assembly's resolution on the independence of Western Sahara. So within a couple of months of the government changing, the government appointed PR, a permanent representative of the United Nations, reaffirmed Guyana's support for Western Sahara, for SADR, the independence of Western Sahara, the Polisario, which is the Liberation Front, which is fighting for independence. Guyana historically participated in the United Nations Special Committee on Decolonization, what they call C24. And it supported the independence of colonial peoples. Guyana was actually the chairman of that committee in 1979, 1980, under the PNC administration. So this issue is not strange. It's not something that the Guyana government is unfamiliar with. Because as I'm reiterating over and over again, Guyana is not only a member of the United Nations Committee on Decolonization, it actually served as chair right up to, and was making declarations right up to October 2020, after this administration change. What is taking place here? What is responsible for this drastic and sudden change? The question is that something is happening which the Guyanese people are not aware of. The SADR, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, is a member of the African Union, and it has been so since 1984. When the Arab Democratic Republic was admitted, Morocco, which of course claimed sovereignty, withdrew from the OAU. And suddenly in 2017, it rejoined the AU. And we must wonder what is taking place here. Why did it withdraw and why did it rejoin? Now, it has been working over time to undermine the support which SADR enjoyed in the third world. At one stage, SADR, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, was recognized by 43.5% of United Nations member states. It was recognized by 38 out of 54, the 70% of African Union members. It was recognized by 18 out of 57 Organization of Islamic Cooperation members, the OIC, and it was recognized by 5 out of 22 of Arab League members. So there has been significant and substantial recognition of the rights of the Sahrawi people to their independence. And that has been the trend for the last 70 years. India got its independence, Sri Lanka got independence, Pakistan, Myanmar, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Guyana, Trinidad, we all got independence because of the position taken by the United Nations and the whole trend of decolonization after the Second World War. Now, despite the SADR's struggle for sovereignty, there were forces, as I said, which were operating against the Sahrawi people and against the state of SADR, even though the state cannot physically occupy the territory of Western Sahara because of Moroccan aggression. We now realize that there were some other movements taking place in the international relations. And I would say that those movements have gradually eroded the support of states which once supported the SADR, once supported the Sahrawi people, just demand for independence and for a state of their own. People cannot live in tents for 40 or 50 years. They need a home, and their home is Western Sahara. Now, the United States, under the previous administration, unilaterally derecognized the SADR and perhaps recognized Morocco's sovereignty over Western Sahara since December 2020. Well, the United States is a very powerful, very influential state, and once United States had taken such a strong position to support the kingdom of Morocco against the people of Western Sahara, the writing was on the wall. Even though that recognition was rejected by the United Nations, rejected by the European Union, and rejected by the African Union, United States proceeded on the previous administration. There is something in international relations which you may be familiar with. It's called the Abraham Accords. And the Abraham Accords are an invention designed to win people over to support Israel, not to support the Sahrawi people, not to support the independence of Western Sahara, but to encourage countries which previously opposed Israel on ideological or other grounds to do so. And of course, they chose the name of a great patriarch. As you know, Abraham enjoys a very, sacred role, a sacred place in the three religions of the book: Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. But I think this might very well be a misuse of the patriarch's name, the Abraham Accord, because it is devious. It is an attempt to undermine. It is being used now as an attempt to undermine the independence of the Sahrawi people in Western Sahara. Anyhow, we'll come back to the so-called Abraham Accords. We now have to look at the question of Guyana's foreign policy. Are we opting for derecognition or decolonization? For 40 years, we've supported decolonization. Well, the two terms are incompatible. If you support decolonization of the Western Sahara, you can't derecognize the very institution which supports independence for Western Sahara. That is the SADR, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, and the Polisario. So this is not a little matter. This is a serious matter which has been embedded in Guyana's foreign policy for 40 years. So when on the 14th of November 2020, Guyana suddenly announced it would derecognize. In fact, as I said at the beginning of this program, it wasn't Guyana that made the announcement. It was the Kingdom of Morocco that said Guyana is going to derecognize the SADR. So you can figure out how that came about. That the Ministry of Foreign Affairs did not make that announcement. It was the government of the Kingdom of Morocco which told the Guyanese people what the Guyana government would do in relation to the recognition of the SADR. Then on the same year, the 10th of December, the United States announced that it had derecognized, or it would recognize Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara. So they're choosing the kingdom over the people. And that was a violation of international law because the matter is still before the United Nations. And United Nations resolutions affirm Western Sahara's right to self-determination. This was the position of Guyana government for 40 years. And at the same time, bear this in mind, the United States announced that Morocco will normalize its diplomatic relations with Israel. So it seems that there is some quid pro quo, that this is not a matter that is determined by the inalienable right of the Sahrawi people, but this is a matter which is the result of a deal between the Kingdom of Morocco and the United States of America, without consideration for the wishes of the Sahrawi people. These are human beings. These are human beings. This is not an institution here or some fake republic. These are human beings who are living in tents in Algeria up to this day. And it seems that that decision is the result of some form of geopolitical bargain, which I'm not sure Guyana is aware of, or what are the motivations for that deal at this point in time. This raises many questions for the Guyanese people. First of all, are we abandoning our commitment to decolonization because there are other territories which are still colonies? And we have fought, for over 40 years to ensure that all colonies are eventually handed over to the people. It is the people's right that must be paramount, not some geopolitical invention, but the people must have a right to live freely under government of their own choosing. And in this case of the Western Sahara, the Sahrawi people have not chosen to live under the government of the Kingdom of Morocco. That is the first thing. The second thing which we should bear in mind, which is quite strange, is that the United States Secretary of State visited Guyana in September 2020. In October 2020, our permanent representative at the United Nations was still speaking out in support of the SADR, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. But in November, the government of Guyana derecognized the SADR. And in December, the United States of America announced that it is recognizing the sovereignty of the Kingdom of Morocco over the Western Sahara. That is, over the Sahrawi people. This is very difficult for us to understand. Maybe there is something that we don't quite grasp, but it is very painful for the Sahrawi people. After being able to rely on Guyanese support for 4 decades, to suddenly be thrown under the bus. I don't know if the PLO will be next. It seems that some sea change is taking place in Guyana's foreign policy. And the Guyanese people know very little about the motivation for that change. What I would ask, my friends, as we bring this program to an end, what I would ask is, do these decisions advance Guyana's national interest? In what way is Guyana's national interest being served by abandoning the Polisario and the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic at this point in time? Ponder on these matters and ponder on the role of your government, which has had these decisions announced by foreign countries, the Kingdom of Morocco, Taiwan, and Barbados. And let us think of the future and think about the role we can play in ensuring that Guyana continues to be a responsible member of the international community and support underprivileged and colonized peoples all around the world, as we've been doing for the last 40 years. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Each man must do his